Hi, all right, everybody. I hope you had a chance to take a little break, get a little analog in this digital day. Um, I am so excited about this panel. I had a conversation with Sam De La Paz a couple months ago, and we had such a strong connection because we really, truly feel the same way about how we had the opportunity when it's not a new industry, and it's not really, I don't like to call it an industry because I like the community better, but how we had the opportunity to create an industry that was different than the rest and be more compassionate and conscious, socially conscious. And this is what this panel is about, and I'm super excited about it. So take it away, Sam.
Hi.
You're muted. Sam, we can't hear you.
My mic itself is muted.
There you go.
I thank you so much, Susan. I really appreciate the opportunity, and I thank you all for being here and joining us. To the panelists, you guys rock. Each one of you inspires me in such a different way, and I think has the potential and ability to inspire this entire industry and really set an outline of what we can really persevere toward within the industry, and how we can make an impact. And we've actually discussed, like, is it quite an industry right now? Like, how do we define this? And this is something that we'll actually touch on at the end of the conversation. But basically, I just wanted to briefly give an overview of what we'll be discussing. I come from a background in Mendocino County, Sonoma County. Mendocino County, cannabis, living in Sonoma County right now. But just that legacy side of the cannabis community and the impact that they've seen from the war on drugs, and now the kind of capitalist arm that's coming in and pushing out the small players. There is not enough minority diversity within the industry. There are many things we're all very aware of, anybody who's in the industry or around it. I mean, the social equity piece, it touches on so many levels. The term social equity is kind of vague at this point, honestly, but it really touches to so many different corners, from the prison systems to investing to cannabis operators that have been, that basically brought this plant to light, and to minority communities that have been heavily affected by the war on drugs. So we're here to discuss a few different topics: the prison systems, cannabis, as a sustainable future. Basically, it's a sustainable industry that will change the world for the better. We have various panelists. We're going to be discussing a bit about producing empathy and how we show up as our most authentic selves, and how we can really impact the industry and the community, the cannabis culture. And I'm just really grateful for all of you being here. I want to go ahead and start off with introducing the panelist. We have Weldon Angelos, who started Project Mission Green, and he was sentenced to, correct me if I'm wrong, Weldon, but it's 105 years in prison.
55 years, so.
Yeah.
I was facing 105.
Yeah, so 105 years, and they got some partners together, fought for a pardon from Obama, and Obama actually granted him a pardon, and he's been released and is making it his mission to support prisoners who are serving time for just unjust cannabis related nonviolent crimes primarily. And while billionaires and millionaires are profiting out here, it's just unacceptable. It's obscene. So we have Kate Pintor with us today, who sat on the board of Conscious Capitalism here in the Bay Area. So she has a very fond and deep knowledge for conscious cannabis and conscious business. And she also has a very deep connection with cannabis, which she will enlighten us on a little bit. And it's just, you know, very powerful. She's an executive coach, and also working with Matt Johnson, who is a leading video producer responsible for billions of views across the internet. And he wrote a book called Producing Empathy, and it really is about showing up authentically and being, you know, true to ourselves and being honest and just being real. So thank you, Kate, for being here. We have Jeff Trotter, who founded Regenibus with his partner. And this team is amazing. They are working on a network within the cannabis industry and really changing the investment landscape to focus on an ESG lens, which is environmental, social, and governance, which I think governance is the biggest piece. Now, if we had transparent governance throughout capitalism, politics, and all kinds of different things, the world would be a different place. It would be a very different place. So I'm excited to have you here, Jeff. Thank you so much. And we have Brian Chaplin from Medicine Box, who knows firsthand what it's like to start a conscious cannabis company and really keep, you know, hit the ground running with understanding plant medicine. He's got a vast, deep knowledge of mental health and cannabinoids, plant medicine, and how they can really affect all of humanity for the better, and really help enrich our lives and make us more health sovereign. So it's an amazing piece. So grateful to have you here. We have Sarita Evans joining us, and she's having trouble getting on the link, but I'm going to try to troubleshoot that while some of the panels are introducing themselves. She was on for a minute, so I'm not sure what happened. But Sarita is starting an analytical lab in Central California, and she also sat on the board of Conscious Capitalism in the Bay Area. And she has a deep appreciation for the plant. She's gained a whole new relationship with cannabis through her own experience, and also understands the tenets deeply of conscious capitalism and conscious business. And she, being a woman of color, also understands the social equity piece and the need for minority inclusion within this industry, because it is massive and major, you know, and that's, I'm so grateful to have you here as well, Sarita. I'm glad, looks like she made it on. Woo! All right, you're on mute, but we're gonna bring everybody on one by one. I hope everybody got the outline or the agenda, and so we can kind of go in order here. First up, I'm gonna have Kate Pintor introduce herself and just spend 5 minutes maybe discussing your relationship with the plant, your connection with CCBA, and, you know, your belief in authentic and personal professional growth, because you are an expert at that.
Awesome. Thanks, Sam.
You bet.
I'm Kate Pintor, and it's so funny, my relationship with the plant. And I love that we're leading with health, because so much of my professional life, I have had to compartmentalize so much of that. So this is like, I'm having a moment, because this is the first community where I get to actually lead with my whole self, which is the whole reason I'm here. And so it's really awesome. So I appreciate that. In 2004, I was diagnosed with reflex sympathetic dystrophy, also known as complex regional pain syndrome. And I went down an opiate path that was all they knew how to describe. CRPS is really basically your sympathetic system doesn't shut off. And so through that journey, the opiates, so much collapse. The personal development I was doing couldn't keep up with what was happening internally with my body, only using pharmaceuticals for that period of time. I'm in remission now because of a series of ketamine infusions, and in 2013, and then cannabis has become a part of how I healed from that decade of living on the highest pain on the McGill Index. And I'm able to fully function. I went on to have another baby. I've retrained myself how to sleep. And so it's really brought, I feel like I'm thriving now because I'm in harmony with nature, which wasn't offered to me at the beginning. And I've watched thousands of people, as I've spoken, advocated for people that have that illness, who have come off of morphine pumps, who have moved on and transformed their lives in and out, and are recovering from a lot of, it's just, it's on the inner game and the outer game. They're just in such full recovery because now they're getting the healing that they needed. And we didn't know it was available. It was criminalized. There's just so much as a part of that. And the intersect of this with business is I'm sort of the dive bar test for marketing. And that's like my intersection with conscious business. So no matter how we're doing, and we have all these high level conversations about business, because I had that journey, I sort of bring in like, are we being real? Like, is this message is what we're talking about? Are we including everybody? Can we talk about this, on a park bench, or in moving it out of the boardroom into there? And so no matter where I sit, I used to think, this is why I love personal development. I used to think there's something wrong with me, that I'm thinking that I don't fit in with this message, or I don't fit in with this business, no matter how many panels I sat on. There's something wrong with me, or I have to divide part of that. And really with conscious business, as we're thinking about those stakeholders, I know now that my ability, that I'm always holding those stakeholders. I'm always thinking about what is this greater good, and what's the health of the individual, the health of the whole, the health of the globe, and how all of those pieces fit together. It makes such a huge difference in what we're able to recreate. So in marketing is personal development. I actually got into business and marketing because of it takes people to that edge where they get to become the highest version of themselves. And in this movement, even in terms of the authenticity that we're learning to be there, like everybody really is overcoming not only their story and their journey, but learning how to show up with their messaging, in a framework that can feel very inaccessible. There's so much intellectual privilege in that space. And so as I've just journeyed as a marketer and serving on some of these panels, it's being with people. If you can't be with somebody at all aspects of that, your messaging is really going to suffer. And so how do we have these larger conversations and also have it work on a one-to-one? That's kind of what I'm committed to with the work that I do. That's kind of all over the place, but that's my intro.
I love it, Kate. Thank you so much.
You have to pass the dive bar test. Yeah.
Yeah, no, you've got so much insight and so much value to bring, and you really are a living miracle, honestly. And I'm so glad to hear that cannabis has showed up for you the way it has, and grateful.
Thanks, Sam.
Yeah, thank you. And Brian, can you spend 5 minutes or so just discussing your relationship with the plant, your passion for plant medicine? You're on mute, just so you know. And just your beliefs regarding conscious business, etc. Like what brought you here, what you believe.
Yeah, man. Well, thank you for putting this together, Sam. Appreciate
Absolutely.
it. It's good to be on this panel with some really inspirational people. I come from the traditional market, underground cultivator for many years, starting in 2009. And it's an interesting question that you've proposed. What is your relationship to the plant? And it makes me think back in 2016 when I was making this transition from the traditional market into the more regulated marketplace coming in the future in 2018. And I was at a meeting with I got distracted. Steve Havel just jumped in on the chat there. That was my conscious capitalism coach. Hey, Steve. Look what's going on now, buddy. Back when we worked together, this wasn't even kind of a blip on the radar with conscious capitalism. So we've come a long way. And I was in a meeting with several folks, and my question to the whole lunch table was, what's everyone's 5-year plan in the cannabis industry? And I always look back on that moment because that was just such a probably unconscious question. And I ended up switching that question when I'd meet people to, what is your relationship with the plant? And I realized I could get much more of an authentic representation of that, that person or that entity when I asked that more direct question, and we were able to have much more of a authentic conversation and get down to some brass tacks. So thank you for asking that question. And that person at that lunch table one of those people ended up becoming my mentor, and he pulled me aside at this property that we were touring. And he said, Brian, I couldn't answer your question because I won't be around in 5 years. And he had cancer, and he ended up passing away in 2018. But the 3 years that we had together, he taught me everything about the plant, because he had a 54-year relationship with the plant, and bred, CBD, high CBD genetics with Lawrence Ringo and all the guys up in Humboldt. And we made medicine together, and he was the one that really taught me the importance of cannabinoid and terpene combinations, and that the plant is just more than THC, and it's more than just CBD, but it's also this larger gestalt of a community and collaboration and recovery and mindfulness, spiritual principles. And those all became the brand pillars of Medicine Box. And then nature as this, medium that really kind of connects us all together. And so at that time, I started to, learn how to make, real cannabis medicine. It was always this kind of lip service, right? Like, oh, we're growing Prop 215, we're growing medicine, and we have 1,000 patients in our collective, guilty as charged. And, that medicine helped me in my own recovery from drugs and alcohol. I was, still experiencing high highs and low lows in my sobriety journey. And I was prescribed Prozac, which is an SSRI, and we made medicine that mimicked the same thing that Prozac does, and boosted serotonin and blocked certain receptors, so I could transition off of a very dependent pharmaceutical. And once that happened, that's when I really became a firm believer in plant medicine. And I was also working with Steve at the time, and learning more about conscious capitalism. And I saw this beautiful merger happening of the health and wellness industry, conscious capitalism, and this emerging industry, which we're going to change the word today, I believe, of conscious, or the cannabis industry. So I started to put all those things into this, blender, and what came out of it was this brand called Medicine Box that was built around our own tenets and a larger gestalt of community and collaboration, and looking with a wider perspective beyond just THC and beyond just getting high. And how do we help people in need, and people that don't even know that they need some of the medicine that there's some really good brands that are creating. So that's the mission that I set out to on, and to make some change and make some impact.
Thank you, Brian.
You're
That
welcome,
was
sir.
great, man. Sorry, I had to troubleshoot a couple things there, but man, yeah, your experience within the industry, and just that piece that you come from, the traditional side of the market, where I also hail from years in Mendo, and it's just, that's kind of a mutual connection we share, and I am so grateful, man. Your experience with the plant is cherished and appreciated, and what you're doing with Medicine Box, man, mixing plant medicines like a freaking magician. So yes, next we've got Jeff Trotter. Jeff, please give us a little 2 cents about your relationship with the plant, your passion for sustainable and regenerative growth for all in the cannabis industry.
Well, thank you very much. I hope you can hear me loud and clearly from downtown San Francisco, which is a bit of a ghost town, but good to be here. Thank you to yourself, Sam, and also to Susan for coordinating this, and frankly, for the very warm welcome that I've received, and also to my fellow panelists here. Since I've been introduced to them last week, I've done a bit of digging and looking around. I'm just always sort of blown away by the personalities that I'm meeting in this industry. We'll come on to that a little later also about this industry. You know, my sort of background with the plant, so to speak, is very, very, very limited. So right out the gate, I will say that I have virtually no exposure to the plant. And that may change. And I think there's a very good chance it will change, because I'm learning so much more about the benefits, the health benefits of this plant. And so unashamedly, I can say that I just have not really known that much. And so my, I suppose, interaction with the plant is really, and the movement and this network of wonderful people is really more from an empath. I'm a corporate refugee. I come right out the gate and say that, you know, 10 years ago, I stepped away from being a partner with a Big Four firm. I was living in Hong Kong at the time, and that was a gravy train. I jumped off that gravy train because I felt that there was a calling, if that's not too trite to say. You know, I grew up in the northeast of England, very much sort of socialist roots. I know that's a dirty word here in the United States, but there you go. I have always, I suppose, had it in me from my parents that I should be looking out for others, and I've had that sort of as part of my ethos as I've grown professionally and personally. When I stepped away from the firm in a Grisham-like manner, I determined that I really wanted to get into the world of sustainability, and that was when I moved to San Francisco. I began a study program, an executive program, if you like, an MBA type, at the Presidio Graduate School, which is really, it helped center me all around the world of sustainability. It got me to move into the not-for-profit world, where I spent some time working with an organization that helped put ecological limits central to economic policy making, and that really opened my mind to the limits to growth. And I mention all of this because it was also around about that time that I really got introduced to the sense of this notion of conscious capitalism, and to look beyond this sort of mono view of capitalism, this notion of just economic capital. And frankly, the more I understood more around conscious capitalism, to embrace the other forms of capitalism, for instance, intellectual capital, human capital, social capital, and more importantly, natural capital. Without a healthy, robust natural capital system, we're all doomed, frankly. So not to put sort of an existential point on that, we are doomed unless we take care of this planet, period. And I think that as I've learned more into the last 5 or 6 years, I've been working as an independent consultant with the United Nations on a bunch of projects related to the Sustainable Development Goals. And in the last year or so, with my co-founder and former colleague at Sustainable Brands, where we spent some time, so Patrick McCartan and I decided that wouldn't it be a great idea if we could take all of these smarts that we've created over a period of time and use also our power of privilege and our allyship to bring all of this into the world of cannabis. And so we created Regenibus, which, you know, the purpose of Regenibus, frankly, as you stated a little earlier, was and is to democratize the opportunity for regenerative growth for all in the cannabis industry. And if we can underpin our approach then and align the cannabis industry and the movement to understand how then these sustainable development goals, if we deliver to them, we will solve pretty much all of humanity's problems. And the more I understood about a plant and beyond the plant, and people talk about the entourage effect of the plant, these coming together of all of these compounds, at a micro level, I got the sense that if we can create something similar at a macro level, where we can look at multi-stakeholders within this movement that can then align themselves and recognize that there's enough for all here, that if we could bring that notion of the entourage effect at a macro level, this is a game changer. And this is what really got me excited about, sort of firmly embracing myself and throwing myself into the cannabis industry. As I stepped away from the partnership back 10 years or so ago, I really hit a bit of a crisis myself, where I began to wonder why I do what I do. And again, I know that there's this whole work around purpose, but I determined that my purpose was to aspire to become a social billionaire. And the notion then is to, through my smarts and the work that I do, to positively impact 1 billion lives socially and or environmentally through the work that I do. And I think the cannabis industry and this movement provides me, so somewhat selfishly, it provides me the opportunity to really amplify and accelerate my own personal objectives. I've had nothing but just admiration for people I've met in this industry with all of their different stories. I think that collectively, that if we can bring the power of all of that, then this truly will be a game-changing time for humanity. And that's basically in a nutshell about what I think is the opportunity here. So I hope that helps.
That's great. Jeff, thank you so much. And I think it's so important that, especially from an investment perspective, that more and more people, more and more investors that come into the space and more companies within the space start to embrace, this reality and the fact that we can truly change the landscape of industries, whether we want to call this the cannabis industry right now or not. We can set precedents here. You know what I mean? Look at what Weldon's doing with prison reform and what all these different things, that we can really, truly affect change. And we're here together. We're going to make this happen, bottom line. So I love it. I appreciate it. Thank you so much. And Weldon, can you go ahead and just tell us a bit about yourself and your mission and what like a conscious, all-encompassing, equitable industry looks like to you, man?
Yeah, sure.
Thank you for
Thanks.
being here.
Yeah, thanks for having me. So, I first got introduced to cannabis through the music industry. In my teens, I wanted to be in the music industry. I looked up to people like Snoop Dogg and Tupac Shakur. And a few years later, I ended up working directly with them. And we use cannabis for inspiration and creativity. So cannabis obviously helped a lot with creativity. I know Tupac and Snoop both, used it for that purpose. And so that's how I first became, involved with the plant. And so I'd say in the mid 90s and up to the early 2000s, I was working in the industry with a lot of legends, produced a whole album for Snoop Dogg. But I also got the crosshairs put on me because of my relationship in the rap industry. And I was living in Salt Lake City, Utah at the time, although I was working in Los Angeles. And so I was bringing those artists to my hometown, and it sort of put, the attention on me. And the local authorities launched an investigation to see, if they could purchase cannabis from me, because actually we just made a video with Snoop called "A Little More Dope to Smoke," and it was this rap video where we were smoking foot-long joints and going on tour, just kind of a funny video. And so they had gotten a hold of that video and they launched an investigation. And so through that investigation they purchased a few $100s worth of cannabis 3 times, and I was ultimately sentenced to 55 years for that, for about $900 worth of cannabis total. And it actually sparked a movement with a number of people in the entertainment industry who, had my back, and people in the political realm like Senators Mike Lee and Cory Booker. Even the judge who actually was enforced to impose the punishment was also, part of that movement. And so even the Koch brothers, surprisingly, was a big help. And so we put together this group of unlikely allies to fight for my release. And so we all pitched to President Obama, my story and why my sentence was unjust. And 4 years ago, I was released. The day I got out, I hit the ground running. You know, I started working with, you know, I brought everyone together that got me out, and I'm saying we need to help other people who I left behind who don't have celebrity friends, you know, lawmakers supporting them. And so, you know, we brought that group together and we passed the first federal criminal justice reform since 1970 called the First Step Act. Now, the First Step Act actually, you know, reformed a number of drug mandatory minimums. It gave extra good time. It did a lot of good. The one thing it didn't do was it didn't do anything for the individuals who are in prison for purely cannabis cases. There was a guy I was in prison with named Luke Scarmazzo who received a 22-year sentence for operating a legal medicinal dispensary in Modesto, California. And so he was one of the gentlemen I left behind and who I remembered when we passed the First Step Act that, you know, this is not benefiting him, so there's more work to do. So I launched what's called the Mission Green Initiative. The Mission Green Initiative focuses exclusively on people who are in there for cannabis. We were able to get Luke's co-defendant out through a presidential commutation, although Luke's was denied. And we were able to get other people free. And that's sort of been my mission since I've been out. And we're bringing the entertainment industry together with folks in the cannabis industry, people like Kush Supply Co., who are really getting behind us financially to allow us to operate on this level. You know, I work directly with the White House on clemency. We have relationship with governors across the country. And, you know, if we're fully funded, we could do a lot of damage in this space. And so, you know, that's my mission is freedom. Nothing's more important than freedom. And so that's the inspiration for Mission Green. We also launched a social equity cannabis brand called Reform Cannabis with 2 E's. And that money, some of that money is going directly to the cannabis prisoners' commissary accounts. And so we're sort of approaching this from all angles because we feel like if you've been affected by cannabis prohibition, you've been to prison for it, or you're in prison now, you should be benefiting from the legal industry. And one thing that's unique about Mission Green is that our whole organization is comprised of people who've been affected by prohibition. We've either been to prison, been racially profiled, or had some interaction with law enforcement over cannabis prohibition. And so that's the difference between Mission Green and these other organizations. So we feel like the people closest to the problem are closest to the solution, but furthest from the power and resources. And so, you know, we really want to get people who've been impacted, allow them to have a say in how we reform this industry.
Love that, man. Thank you so much, dude, for what you're doing out there, bro. I can't even tell you. I mean, it's literally just making a massive impact on so many lives because it's a big ripple effect. You know what I mean? It's a big ripple effect also on those prisoners and their lives and their loved ones and all the networks that they could have been building this whole time or that they could be building and the businesses that they could be building, the ways that they could be, you know, benefiting, like you said. And I fully agree. It's insane, you know, what's happening out there.
That is for sure.
Yeah. So thanks, bro. Sarita,
yeah,
I'm gonna have you introduce yourself next and just tell us a little bit about your relationship with the plant, what you're up to, what you're building, and your, you know, background and history with conscious capitalism and where those tenets kind of land in your heart of hearts, in your soul, you know.
thank you so much. Thank you, Sam, and thank you, Susan, for putting this together. And you know, like Jeff said, I'm really kind of blown away by this whole panel and learned a lot. It's just in the couple of times just listening to you today. I'm glad I kind of got to go last because I get to hear all you. And you know, it's really been a pleasure, kind of just, you know, meeting new people and being able to speak my voice here. So relationship, it's interesting that, you know, how appropriate we start with that, because I think that is kind of the foundation for, you know, for a lot of things. It's a foundation for this particular space. I won't call it industry, this particular space. You know, it's kind of building on that foundation. But my relationship with the plant specifically, you know, it's interesting. Like Jeff, when I first got into this industry, I had no really relationship to it other than way back in the day. You know, I certainly enjoyed it, but then there was a long period of time, and I kind of got involved in this whole industry because I was a mentor and a teacher for small businesses, and I was sitting in a pitch, and these two guys came in and they started talking about the safety side of it and the safety and wellness, and that's kind of my background a little bit. And they were talking about labs, and I didn't know anything about labs. Like, what do you do? Sit around and test the, smoke and test test the power of it or whatever. I didn't know what it was. But after listening to them, I got a really clear. They gave me a really clear, idea of what that was about. But more than anything, our CEO, my co-founder, he had a story, and he had a story about his son who was autistic, and it just captured me. I can see that he was doing this out of passion. He was doing this, for a higher purpose, not just to, just to get in and make money and, get and satisfy, investors, but it was really about, for him, it was about creating something that's safe for, safe for kids and especially for his kid, and doing research. So anyway, we teamed up. And then recently, I went through a bout of cancer. So it's kind of like, okay, Spirit says, I'm going to give you a purpose. I'm going to give you a reason, And I went through this bout with cancer. And right after I was diagnosed, I was really confused, not really sure which way to go. I knew I had to get surgery, and I was afraid of what would come after that. And this person showed up. This person, in my community, kind of showed up, and we were talking, and he educated me about the power of THC, and he also gifted me 90 days of RSO treatment medicine, and kind of let me know how to work it. And he checked in on me, and I religiously did this, and I know I have evidence that my tumor shrunk. But I have no doubts whatsoever that it did amazing things for my body, and that it minimized the impact of the cancer and, on my body, and both my body and spirit. I didn't do radiation. I chose not to do that. So, I'm here, I feel great. And I now have my personal story. I have my personal relationship that drives me day in and day out to get up and educate others and help others like someone helped me. So my background really was around health and wellness, so this kind of fit right into that. I had a gym. I was also a trainer and mentor. I still am, and non-practicing attorney. I have my legal training, but I don't practice in the state of California. So I would say I'm a serial entrepreneur. That's what I love. I love putting together businesses. In fact, I've got like a nickname, I'm fondly known as the entrepreneur doula. So I help birth businesses. So that's what I do, and I love it. So my history, I'll just talk about my history a little bit with conscious capitalism, because I was introduced to conscious capitalism by two very dear friends. And they were actually the ones that started this chapter in the Bay Area. So they had, they were talking to me about it, and they knew I had, I had several businesses going on. This was way before the cannabis. And so they said, we want you to read this book, and we're going to start this chapter. And we have this chapter, and we want you to be on our board. And so I said, okay, and I didn't really want to read the book, but I said, okay, I'll do that. And I read the book because I knew that she would ask me later, what'd you think? And she would ask me specific things of the book because I know her. So I wanted to, I didn't want to lie to her and say, that I read it, and I didn't. So I read the book, and what I found, though, was that I was considered an unconscious conscious capitalist. So I was actually, my businesses, I ran that way, but I didn't have a name for it. I didn't know that there was like a movement that people really thought this way. And so I just ran it, the way that was right for me. And, there was a lot of, people that I think there's a lot of people that fall into that, probably a lot of people in this space that fall into that, they are really doing it. And I found my tribe through conscious capitalism. And so, I stay as involved as I can. I've got a lot of stuff going on, but I support them, and that's where I met Steve, who was talking to Brian there. So I served on the board for about 3 years, and it was, and like I said, I still am very dear friends with the founders, and so I'm, as involved as I can. Now, where I am, so where that fits in with where I am today, is, now I'm in this space, and I think about conscious capitalism. I mean, what does conscious business mean to me? And it's really kind of, it's kind of, they have on their website, believing in elevating humanity through business. So I think believing in that is really key. And, just making sure that I'm existing and thriving in business by rising to lead from my higher power, really staying in contact with that. One of the tenets that really just kind of, first thing that popped in my head when I thought about, conscious capitalism and the cannabis industry is that, there was a lot of us enjoyed the, consumption, and when they criminalized it, there was, it fell, it affected everybody, but it fell disproportionately on people of color. And I know that personally. I have a nephew that was caught up into that, which blows my mind that now I'm in this business and that it's legal, and he spent time in jail. It just drives me nuts. But anyway, but now, now that it's legal in California, and I think California does better than a lot of other places, there's still barriers. There's barriers for people of color financially, getting involved in networks, and I just think that I've seen that. I've seen that personally for myself. And I think that what I would, I kind of look at the tenet that drives me as kind of stakeholder orientation, because it talks about, the stakeholders being your employees and your investors and your customers. And I want to include that to be the communities that they may not be a customer, but they may be a community that we serve, or that is served by this particular space. So that being said, I really want to kind of expand that to be communities, so we can really focus on relationship versus just profit. So we can really build out our relationships. This is the time. This is kind of a startup, really, for, if this was looked at as one business, it's kind of we're still in the early stages of the legalization of it. Certainly not the plan itself, but the legalization of it. And I think that, we're setting the tone as we go forward. So I kind of want to challenge all of us, me, everybody, to reach out to the communities and let us be consciously trying to, employ, invest, and support our communities of color. So that's the challenge. And today I'm actually, I talked about having, Sam talked about me having a lab, and we do analytical testing. We also do research testing. Right now we're working more on research because we're trying to get our validation for, from the BCC for our license. And then we will then be doing a COA testing along with research. Research will always be part of our DNA because that's just who we are. And so, in reality, there is no legal cannabis without testing. So, it's a really important space, and, we're almost there. We're just working on the last little bit. We've been raising for 2 years, or almost 2 years. And I can tell you in that 2 years, I have seen one African-American investor that we've talked to. Everybody else has been basically Caucasian men. So, and it's hard to have them see you as, part of their community. So anyway, it's, we're almost there. We're excited. I'd love to share more with you about the lab space. You can get my email address, send me a note. I'd love to touch bases with you. And if you want to know anybody that wants to invest in the space, we're here, so that's where I'm at. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Sarita. That was great. And I love all the differentiation of your perspective, and also just really sharing that piece with us there at the end. It's serious out there. I mean, when you go to try to put a panel together, or you want to find investors, or you want to invest or even just purchase from minority owned cannabis. You know, there's some folks in Oakland doing great things like Ramon Garcia and a lot of the social equity movement happening down there is really at the forefront of the minority in the cannabis space, the minorities in the cannabis space movement, which is great. And so it's just very important that we think about all these things. And I was going to just say a couple things briefly before we get into just some closing statements. We're just going to kind of have some open dialogue here in a few minutes and talk about, you know, any thoughts and feelings that we have and what we, you know, and what we see impacting this industry the most going forward, or this community, this cannabis culture the most going forward. And we're going to talk about our little mission to find a keyword that is replacing industry. So can we do that? We'll see if we can pull that off. Yeah. but basically, I was just going to speak to kind of the mountain folk, the side of the industry from the hills, the culture that I come from. And, you know, just basically say to anyone listening from that side of the tracks, you know, hang in there. You know what I mean? Hang in there, guys. Like, this is what, you know, I've been talking about this for days within the industry, and I'm not going away. This is going to keep happening. We're going to keep having deep, important conversations about how we can grow sustainably as an industry in an inclusive and equitable manner, especially for those that, you know, are suffering literally from PTSD from years of, you know, and I hear that sometimes, and I'm just like, oh, we don't want to, like, you know, use that as a cop out or whatever, like, you know, victimize ourselves or anything like that. But it's so freaking true. You know, we, as a culture, have been oppressed. You're looking over your shoulder. You know, I'm experiencing it right now in different ways with business and business loans and things like that. You know, it's like, there's different things that I've, you know, that I have not had at my disposal because I chose to take an alternative counterculture route in the world. And I know that it's scary, and I know that we've built up a lot of barriers and walls and tensions, you know, and lack of trust because of the oppression of this plant and our culture. But, you know, we have to lead by example. If you don't, one of my favorite mantras these days is, if you set boundaries now, you won't build barriers later. And, you know, it's just a matter of knowing your boundaries, knowing your kind of, you know, strengths and your weaknesses, owning it, and being authentic in who you are. And also using your voice, speaking up, like, for all operators from the traditional side of the tracks that are even remotely interested in getting involved in the industry, or those of you who are from the culture side of the industry and the legacy operator side of the industry, and you're in it, get active, use your voices. You know what I mean? Because I'm sorry, but you're not going to affect change if you just sit back and complain about the problems and don't take some sort of action. And it's hard. I know, like, I mean, I'm debating running for city council and things, you know what I mean? I'm like, what? I never thought I'd think about stuff like that. But it's true. It's like, you know, Casey O'Neill said on the panel that we did in Humboldt Grace that it's kind of like a civics lesson at this point that cannabis has helped us with, because we're learning about these things. We're learning about what policy and legislation and you know, legal stuff looks like. And if we truly want to affect equitable, you know, sustainable growth for this industry and impact the culture and the communities in the best way possible, and human existence. I mean, these plants are going to reach every facet of this planet in such a massive way that I don't think anybody really grasps that. I mean, not even us, not even me, none of us here, in a sense. Like, we try, but it's like, it's gonna literally supersede our expectations. So let's do it right. You know what I mean? That's kind of my piece. And other than that, yeah, just I want to open it up for discussion and talk about our fun keyword thing, and just let it free flow from here, y'all. So anybody have any thoughts?
Wow, Slot.
Yeah, sorry.
That's great. I mean, you really summed up a lot. It's hard, you know, it's hard to, like, add to that. I did I did notice, just like in the chat, someone, talking about, like the poor, the disabled, the LGBT, the people of color were stepped on. And they, so this is something that, it sounds harsh, but it's the truth. And so if we just realize we're not there, we're here, and we can do something now,
Exactly.
then, then let's do it. Let's come together and let's do that. Let's make it part of our ethos as we start out in this new, I say space, I like the word space, cannabis space. So that's two things in one I got in.
Boom, yes. I like space too. That's a good one. Anybody else thoughts on the key word and kind of that contemplation and where what you're feeling right now, genuinely?
I like what Sarita said about the space being one large startup. And a startup, looking at my startup, is we're always trying to build community, and who are the people in our community, and who are our customer profiles, and how do we empathize with the people that are fans or loyal fans that we can convert into consumers, right? So cannabis community comes to mind, but the larger part of the community is a gestalt, and cannabis gestalt, and that is part of Medicine Box's brand values is to have a gestalt amongst all the team members within our startup. So if it's a larger startup, gestalt psychology or gestalt consciousness, if we're all thinking in the ways of conscious capitalism and elevating humanity, like Sarita said, we may have a chance and not be doomed. Like Jeff said, Rob Hall, a journalist at MG Magazine, a couple of years ago, he said to me, if we don't get this cannabis industry correct, Brian, we're going to be doomed.
Right.
The planet's going to be effed. So how do we get it right? But I think it requires a change in belief systems, the change in the way of we have the entries into industry, space, community, gestalt, and then finishing by at the Conscious Company Leaders Forum in 2017, I heard Roz speak, and he was talking about, actually having compassion for the people that made the world that Jeff came from, this corporate world, having compassion for them and ushering them into this new way of doing businesses. And it's not a industry, but it's a monastery, and creating a monastery for us all to, live under or work within. So those are some thoughts that came to my mind there.
I'm just going to piggyback right onto that. I was thinking of all of the stories. We talk about a compassionate entry. Steve Havel and I were talking about this, I think it was 2 months ago, but there's for someone like myself that comes from, historically from a conservative upbringing, in this other space, and being I think of the community, and 1 in 6 people are suffering in chronic pain, and they'll never open that door because of the stigma. And so every time we share these stories, there's a halo effect that happens, and it's an invitation. So I love the word space, but also in the grander chapter of how this story is written, every moment that we show up authentically for that connection, no matter where we are, that is also a part of this. So it's not a system. It's really in that human connection that's there, that is being in harmony with what the healing that's available, the connection that's available, that people are longing for. And there's just so much suffering. So the more we tell these authentic stories, but honoring in those little tiny moments and in that larger sphere, bringing that authenticity into the boardroom, bringing all of that all of the time. I love what Jeff had said earlier. It's like jumping off the train, but there's just these powerful moments of transparency and truth and being with what is. And that's and a compassionate gateway, because you do want more coming in. We want to be available for those moments and get out of the way of making that a part of it. So, and I think there's a story, but that halo effect is a part of this. It matters. Every little micro movement matters.
Yep. Fully agree. Go ahead, Jeff.
Yeah, no, this is fascinating for me. And since we had a warm-up call earlier in the week, I've been pondering this, and to the point that, you know, I wouldn't say losing sleep, but, you know, I'm thinking about it frequently. And part of the challenge that I have is goes down two paths, which is, you know, the usual sort of decision-making process of, but what about this? What about this? The thing about the word industry is it has all sorts of connotations going back to Victorian times, which are all that's wrong with the current world. That frankly, industry suggests an economic model which, you know, powers up the 1% and leaves behind everybody else. And frankly, we can't allow that to continue. And that's fundamentally what conscious capitalism is all about. It's a, recognizing the different forms of capital, but it's also being conscious. Where consciousness, frankly, is both passive as well as assertive. I mean, you can be conscious and to be aware, but you can also be assertive of what you want to be aware of. And I think that, and similarly also consciousness means, I think, intent. So what is your intent? And I think that's something to be very assertive about. And so I would assert that there are times when I will feel it is necessary to use the word industry because that's the jargon that others are using. But I would not hesitate to say, but before you get on and start riding down the path to be part of that 1%, I would encourage you to be part of the 100% and to recognize that industry now, we're going to take it back. We're going to claim it back, and we're going to talk about cottage industry type things, which were from the medieval times, which frankly oftentimes worked. So we just need to reclaim some of the jargon and the language that is out there. I think, you know, also part of industry is sectors. At Regenibus, we see 3 distinct sectors, but integrated: recreational, medical, and hemp. Hemp alone is a massive game changer because it's going to impact other industries, the energy industry, because it can be a fuel, the food industry, apparel industry, you name it. Mm-hmm. And so I think it's okay for us to continue to use it, but to be mindful and assertive and with intent, use it in the right way and remind people that it's not of the old economy, but of a new economy. And I think it's also okay, very much okay, to talk about a movement, because frankly, it's the 6 or 7 people here, plus all of the networks that we enjoy working with, that will drive this transformative change for humanity. And I think that's how we can become all-inclusive, that we become a movement, a human movement. And this is our moment. This is our time. And so that's what I think. And so if we all get this right, others will come with us. And that's part of a movement.
Yes.
We have to create that. There have been some amazing movements over the time, the last few decades. And people come and go, and people pick up that mantle and run with it. Great John Lewis passed recently. Others will unfortunately have to pick up his torch until we eradicate what it is that he set out to eradicate. And until that is done, his work will continue with somebody else, and that's part of a movement. So I use that as an example.
I appreciate that, Jeff. That's great, man. I fully agree with everything that you're saying. We had a few questions and answers come in the chat, and I didn't realize that I was looking at the chat, not the Q&A. So one of them was mentioning sector. Again, they mentioned sector was a good one. What models do we see working for conscious capitalism? We only have a couple minutes left, so I don't really know if we have time now. I'm so sorry, everyone, that I didn't catch these in the separate Q&A section there. But what models do we see working for conscious capitalism? What is your vision for enfranchising people of color and Native people in the space? I think those are important questions. Maybe I'll read these and we can all just consider them. And if we come back for another panel at some point or something, we can address some of these things.
If you don't mind, Sam, let me just very quickly, somewhat naughtily, the Sustainable Development Goals. The Sustainable Development Goals are 17 goals, 169 targets, 200 plus indicators. If we begin to dive into what are the Sustainable Development Goals, for example, SDG 8 looks at workers' rights. If we look at how the cannabis industry, no matter the sector, how it can impact workers' rights and how workers' rights can be impacted by it, that is one example. If we look at SDG 10, reducing inequalities, it's absolutely critical that we look at the inequalities that are pervasive across every industry right now. And that's why we have an opportunity to correct that. So the SDGs will, I think, provide the necessary framework. And that's, I guess, how we've positioned Regenibus in that sense.
That's great. That's great. And, you know, I think as well as, you know, prison reform, the medical system, the medical cannabis, and these patients that literally built the stepping stones of what we now call the cannabis industry, they're getting left behind heavily. And so these are major pieces. My biggest thing would be we have to work together. Okay, that no industry that's come before us has ever worked together in a very, very sustainable, united manner. And really, it's always been like dog eat dog, you know, who's the first one to the top, you know, type of bullshit, straight up. It's not conducive to perpetual growth. I love Simon Sinek's book, Infinite Game. It's an infinite game. We have to think long-term, generational, and you know, who deserves those rights. But I just want to thank you all. We're hitting the 12:30 mark. And I want to thank you all so much for being here. And thank you, Susan. I love Susan's idea of a cooperative media. You know, that's a perfect example of cooperative. You know, we really need to think cooperatively if we all want to see our relationships in this industry survive and not be bought out by capitalism. We need to work together.
Amen. Thank you so much, Sam, and thank you, panelists. I'm going to show a quick video that Brian made because it's lunchtime and it's a great video. And then we're going to have Bree Wolf is going to take us through. We're going to smoke some cannabis and we're going to do some breathing exercises. And so we've got a 30-minute lunch break, but we've got stuff to do. And then we'll come back and we're going to have a panel on celebrity branding in cannabis. So let me see. I'm going to share this. Thanks again. And if you panelists can stick around, maybe you can answer the questions in the chat. That'd be great.
Yeah, that'd be great, you guys. And if you want, put your info just in, you know, whatever link you might want people to be able to find you into the chat. So,
yeah, I just emailed or sent to Kate and Jeff, and I want to do the same to Sarita and Weldon about exchanging information to keep this conversation going.
Yeah, let's do this. I'd be happy to meet on a regular basis with this group and really discuss what we're all doing to kind of keep that ball rolling, you know.
Definitely.
Yeah, because it's super important.
It's the most important.
Yeah, I agree.
We'll do it again.